Guys, this might just be the statement of the year. BlackRock is actually saying now that Bitcoin will replace the traditional financial markets. How crazy is that? And this is coming from BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world. Guys, do you realize how powerful that is? The current traditional financial markets, just think about how massive those machines are. And Bitcoin isn't just going to revolutionize them. Bitcoin is going to replace them. Jack Dorsey once said something similar. No, Bitcoin isn't going to reform or improve the fiat system. It's going to completely replace it. And now BlackRock is on the same page. Just like I've always told you, Bitcoin will prevail. Of course, it might still take a while before we have Bitcoin as the world reserve currency or as the global denominator or something like that. But now BlackRock is riding that same wave. Bitcoin is going to become the new world currency here. It's going to completely replace the traditional financial system. And you can all just imagine for yourselves. Okay, what does that mean for the price of Bitcoin? I mean, the price of Bitcoin would have no more upper limit. Bitcoin will absorb everything, all assets and much more. We're going to take a look at the explosive statements from BlackRock, but also some other comments from Stackhodler, who believes that the big print is just around the corner. We are on the verge of the last intense, massive wave of money printing that's coming our way, and it could easily push us to new all-time highs in this cycle. 200,000, 300,000, and even more. But first, let's drop a like below so Bitcoin can keep gaining ground and this information can spread further. The market really seems to be dead right now. There's zero interest and so on. That makes it even more important that you're here doing your research now, because Bitcoin will prevail, whether the masses are paying attention or not. Sooner or later, the masses will join in, and everything we're looking at now, these aren't my quotes, these aren't my statements. These are statements from BlackRock. Later, we'll also talk about Stackhodler, and honestly, I'm at a loss for words. There are basically no price limits anymore. Even Michael Saylor, what he sometimes says, is actually very bearish compared to what BlackRock is saying now. And we're going to check this out right now. This is a clip, and it's the CLO of BlackRock. You could already see him here. And this was at the Crypto Summit, where Donald Trump also spoke 2 days ago or so. And now this intense clip has just surfaced. I honestly don't know where these videos are coming from, whether there was a live stream or something like that. I definitely didn't see anything, but in any case, these intense videos are out now. Just check it out, grab a coconut, and relax. If what the world's largest asset manager is saying here actually happens, then it's game over. That also makes it clear, or it becomes clear, why BlackRock is betting so heavily on Bitcoin, because their big vision isn't just, okay, this is a bit of a global diversifier. That's what it says in the latest BlackRock report. Bitcoin, a global diversifier in uncertain times, or something along those lines. No, it goes way beyond that. It doesn't stop at being just a diversifier. The diversifier is going to swallow everything up. The black hole theory, which I've told you about many times, that Bitcoin will suck up the monetary premium from a whole bunch of asset classes, is now being confirmed by BlackRock, not just by some YouTubers making half-naked videos here in El Salvador.
What advice would you give to, sort of the rest of the financial universe that are thinking about getting into this space now?
It's a great question. I think from our lens, it's a very, what I'm going to say is going to be very simple. Executing it is extremely hard. So I recognize that.
Also Achtung, sagt schon, hey, was würdest du hier für einen Tipp geben anderen Leuten? Da sagt er, hey, das hört sich jetzt sehr, sehr simpel an. Das Ganze aber umzusetzen ist natürlich ein bisschen schwieriger, wie sich das jetzt hier erstmal anhört. Aber jetzt Achtung, jetzt kommt die Aussage.
It's very basic. Set of exposures. The real utility at Unlock is to be able to put them in the whole portfolio. And interestingly enough, I think you could throw the telescope around also and say, ultimately, how do you put these capital markets exposures in digital wallets? And how do you go? So if you think about the bridge strategy of this alternate digital asset universe and bringing it to the capital markets, I think it's naive to assume, and this doesn't have to be in a month, but if you look out over time, it's naive to assume that you don't also have to think through how do you bring the traditional capital markets to this alternative universe. And I think both connection points will define the next decade.
I could agree more, and the best example of it, by the way, was the ETFs.
This is just so intense. What he's saying is just so crazy. He's saying, okay, hey, we don't need to think about how to, for example, I've said, for example, a lot, how to bring Bitcoin to Wall Street, how to bring Bitcoin to Blackrock, how to include Bitcoin in the traditional financial world. How can I build even more financial products and so on around it? But instead, we should really be asking ourselves whether it's possible that the entire world could just get swallowed up by Bitcoin, pulled into Bitcoin. That's always the so-called black hole theory. He also says, connecting these things together is what's going to define the next decade. And here, has summed the whole thing up here. Here, Blackrock just said that Bitcoin will replace the traditional capital market. Because that's basically what he said here, that the traditional capital market will essentially merge into Bitcoin. He also really struggles at times to articulate himself here. He doesn't even know how to put it into words. He also says very cautiously, hey, this isn't going to happen next month, but rather over the next decade. He's actually a bit more bullish about it than I am. I always say, okay, it could happen sooner or later, but for it to happen in the next decade, that means within the next 10 years. That means, in the next 10 years, Bitcoin will more or less either completely take over, revolutionize, render obsolete, or simply replace the traditional capital markets. But in any case, the traditional financial markets will be absorbed into Bitcoin. I mean, sure, that's the long-term theory, that Bitcoin will become the ultimate savings tool. So why would we even need so many, side parking spots or whatever, if you can just get risk-free returns with Bitcoin? That's kind of like the, hurdle rate, like what Michael Saylor or Adam Back, for example, talk about, that Bitcoin is now the new hurdle rate. Something similar could happen here with what Blackrock is preaching. A smart commenter also writes under the video, when Blackrock says replace, it means own. It's a hostile takeover, not adoption. Bitcoin doesn't need Wall Street. Wall Street needs Bitcoin to stay relevant. And BlackRock knows this too. And BlackRock should also be well aware that if their thesis is correct, then of course, over the next decade, they could have massive influence here. And of course, make huge profits if they accumulate Bitcoin and so on. But they also know that in the long run, the big idea is still that eventually Bitcoin could replace Wall Street, and maybe even replace BlackRock itself. Of course, that's the really big risk. But first, we have to go through the phase we're entering now. That means, for now, we're entering a phase where we'll have multiple things at once. We'll have Bitcoin, we'll have ETFs, we'll have stocks, we'll have Wall Street. Everything will function side by side. We'll have the dollar, the euro, Bitcoin, and so on. There will be more and more competition. Bitcoin will continue to take up more space, but in my opinion, it could still take more than 10 years before Bitcoin has taken over the entire space. And then it will also be interesting to see whether we even need so many asset managers anymore. Maybe to a certain extent, yes. But do we really still need asset managers to manage so much wealth for us then? Or can't we just manage our Bitcoins ourselves on a hardware wallet? Maybe in the long run, education will also improve so that people know, okay, how can you do self-custody? How can you store Bitcoin securely on a hardware wallet? I always tell you, hey, get yourself a hardware wallet. Then you can already manage your Bitcoins very, very securely. Then you don't have to rely on asset managers like BlackRock and so on. And that's the big question. It could also be that I'm too bullish. It could also be that in 20 years, or 50 years, we'll be sitting here and Bitcoin hasn't become what people thought. Like it hasn't taken over everything. But at least it's gotten significantly bigger. Maybe it has increased 100-fold or 50-fold, but there will still be. Well, I mean, even if I say that Bitcoin will basically swallow up everything here and so on, that still doesn't mean there won't be any banks at all, or that BlackRock and so on will completely disappear. But the point is that this part here will just be significantly smaller, and then it also becomes a matter of definition. Whether you say it has basically swallowed up everything, or whether swallowing everything also means, okay, a small part can still have BlackRock here, and that's fine too, as long as someone chooses it voluntarily and so on. But then people will simply be so much more advanced in terms of knowledge and know-how. And something that fits in here as well is a statement from Stackadler, which is also very, very interesting. He says here, the big print is just a couple of cheese moves away. So the big print will come. By that he means that the central banks will do QE here, that massive amounts of capital will be pumped into the market, and that Bitcoin will just be shot to the moon because of the devaluation or the dissolution of the fiat money system. And he has a very, very interesting take on this. Specifically, he quoted an old tweet of his here, and the old tweet says, we had to revalue gold to 50,000 the ounce, so $50,000 per ounce. We had to revalue gold here, and we had to buy back all the treasuries overnight. That's basically what he means here with the big print. And he thinks this will happen because Iran is going to attack the American markets, specifically the debt markets, by closing the Strait of Hormuz. And that's also a theory from Luke Cronin, which he addresses here. And this theory would mean that the Iran conflict could contribute to this big print happening, the Strait of Hormuz being closed, and then the US would have no choice but to implement QE infinity and revalue gold. And you really have to understand exactly what he means here, because scenarios like this could, of course, also lead to Bitcoin gaining traction much faster, and the Blackrock scenario coming true much sooner. The Strait of Hormuz is a very important shipping route for oil, and if it gets closed, the price of oil will skyrocket. That means a global crisis. Inflation shoots up. U.S. debt markets. The U.S. has massive debt. If trust in the dollar falls, for example due to an oil crisis, the whole system could collapse. That means you also have to understand that oil is extremely important globally, and in such a case, they could take the extreme measure of raising gold to $50,000 to restore confidence in the dollar. In other words, a higher gold price equals more security for the U.S. balance sheet. Debts could be partially backed by gold. Then, in the next step, the U.S. would buy back its own debt to stabilize the market. In short, it's a hypothetical scenario where the U.S. would have to massively revalue gold to prevent a financial collapse after a geopolitical crisis. The entire fiat system is so fragile that, in the end, only hard assets like gold or Bitcoin would help. And that's why it's also very important to have Bitcoin ready for crises and transition scenarios like these. Because if that happens, trust in fiat will collapse. Bonds will also lose trust. Gold will be driven up, but it's controlled, while Bitcoin will explode because it isn't controlled. And that's the ultimate bull scenario that could potentially be coming our way. And then the dollar will fall, a new Bitcoin standard will be born, and Bitcoin will become the lifeboat. And that could significantly accelerate Blackrock's scenario here. I think I need to add that here, because I just saw it yesterday. Of course, this is a hypothetical scenario from StackHubler. That's also what I said, then Bitcoin would shoot up to 200, 300,000, much higher. But as I said, that's a hypothetical scenario. The Blackrock scenario is also a hypothetical scenario. And now we basically have to think about how realistic you think something like that is. Do you think it could actually happen? First, scenario A, that Lord Blackrock will use Bitcoin to replace the traditional financial system. And second, scenario B, that there will be a relatively quick collapse of the dollar, maybe because of things like this. Yes, even Iran could contribute to attacking the financial system. I mean, maybe these are also just maneuvers where you could say, okay, maybe, you often see that hotspots of war are always somehow connected to the financial system. War and money are always linked together. Let me know in the comments below how you assess the whole situation. I'll also put a link for you to 21 Bitcoin. There you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin and get yourself prepared for a collapse, if something like that should happen. In my opinion, it's always really beneficial to be well set up here and to have enough Satoshis ready. Guys, I'll see you. Until then, peace out.